Today, in honor of May the 4th, I'm going to be ranking all of these Star Wars movies from worst to best. I have been wanting to do this for a very long time, but I wanted to wait for May the 4th to actually roll around. And it kind of snuck up on me. I didn't spend a lot of time writing out my thoughts and ideas, so I'm kind of just doing this off the top of my head from scratch. I wrote out my rankings list about an hour ago. And so we're just going to go through it. We're going to have fun with this and just go through the ranking here. So the worst Star Wars movies or the worst Star Wars movie is at number 11, The Last Jedi. Now, The Last Jedi on its own, technically, might not be a bad movie. If The Last Jedi was the only Star Wars movie that we had ever seen, then you would probably walk out of the theater saying, okay, that was kind of cool. That was a new concept. That was something different. And I really, really enjoyed that movie. The problem with The Last Jedi is that it undermines all of the interesting aspects and all of the important aspects of the movies that have came before it. Most notably, it completely destroys Luke Skywalker as a character. And I listened to a podcast where I forget which one it was or who was the host of it, but they were interviewing Sam Witwer. And Sam Witwer is the guy who voiced Starkiller in the Force Unleashed video games, and he also voices Darth Maul in Star Wars The Clone Wars. And what he said was when you take a prominent character such as Luke Skywalker, who is kind of the embodiment of never giving up and never giving in, and you take that character and you completely reverse who he is, and you do that off screen, it's kind of hard for people to accept. And not only is it hard for people to accept that that change took place, I mean, they tried to explain it later on, like this is the reason he became a recluse and a weirdo, but it doesn't really even make sense for his character. It ruins his character. And for Luke Skywalker to show up at the end of the movie in a last stand scenario and it's him just being a hologram is a very dumb idea. And to have him immediately pass away after that is also a dumb idea, especially since they really haven't re-solidified himself as that character who never gives in and never gives up. You can't change a character that much and put him on a redeemable arc and then just kill him off. There had to be more interaction between him and Rey. There had to be more dedication to the Jedi tradition. There had to be more of him actually making an effort to train Rey, because at this point Rey was just good at everything. It would have made more sense if Luke actually spent significant time training her and she gradually became more and more of a great warrior. But to have him spend like 20 minutes with her and show her really nothing, and then her still be dominant in battle, and him just, I don't know, jumping ship and dying off is dumb. It's all dumb. And the secondary stuff that they do with Leia doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And the movie itself, there was an interesting concept towards the end of the movie where Kylo Ren, aka Ben Solo, is trying to get Rey to join him and rule the galaxy. Now, would that been part of the Jedi way for Rey to do that? No. Would that mean she would somewhat become a villain? Probably, but at least it would have been something different. But of course, they have to stick to what's been done in the past. She has to choose the light, he chooses the dark, they go their separate ways, and there's not a whole lot good about it. There's nothing really new about it. And the fact they go out of the way to destroy Luke Skywalker makes it the worst movie of all the Star Wars movies. Number 10 is The Rise of Skywalker. Now, this movie also has a similar problem in that they bring back Palpatine for no apparent reason. And one of the worst lines in all of Star Wars and probably all of film is from Oscar Isaac's character, somehow Palpatine returned. Somehow Palpatine has returned and he has established the final order. Now we have to go kill him. It doesn't make any sense. Now, they tried to explain it away with he's been dabbling in the mystic arts and in cloning, and Snoke might have been actually a clone of him this whole time, and Snoke died, and now it's actually Palpatine. It doesn't work. And to have Palpatine, they change it to where Palpatine is basically this spirit that can possess other bodies and other human beings, and you can't really kill him. And so I think that it's stupid that Palpatine can't really be killed, and they turn him into like this ghost that just possesses people. And the only thing that really can destroy him is his own Force lightning. It doesn't make a lot of sense, because if Palpatine is just a spirit that can corrupt other people, why didn't he just corrupt somebody at the end of Return of the Jedi when Darth Vader throws him down that elevator shaft? And beyond that question, Palpatine living undermines all of the other movies. Movies 1 through 6, the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, it undermines all of that. If Palpatine still lives, then Darth Vader's sacrifice was in vain. Then Luke Skywalker resisting the dark side and almost sacrificing himself by throwing his lightsaber away and saying he's not going to fight his father, all of that becomes in vain. All of the sacrifices, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, all of the other characters, all of that is in vain if Palpatine lives. But yet they went with that idea for some reason. Snoke is not a good character because he's not a very fleshed out character, but at least he's a different character. At least you're not just shoehorning in Palpatine. You could have made him into something interesting. You could have went a different direction. Would it have been good? Maybe not, but at least it have been something different. You didn't have to undermine the entire story by bringing Palpatine back. They try to fix some of the things. They try to explain Leia was in Jedi training and Rey is actually the granddaughter of Palpatine, which does make some sense when you consider how powerful she was immediately. But the fact that I even have to go down that road just shows that the whole story of the sequel trilogy was broken from the very beginning. So that is why Rise of Skywalker is number 10. Number 9, The Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace has a handful of redeemable qualities, mostly with Qui-Gon Jinn and Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ewan McGregor really becomes a main staple of the Star Wars universe, and if it wasn't for the impact that the Skywalker legacy had with Anakin and with Padme and with Luke and with Leia, if it wasn't for how heavily the story leans into those characters, you could easily make the case that Star Wars is an Obi-Wan Kenobi story, because he is somewhat in the background, but he's also, it's almost kind of like you could tell the story of Star Wars from Obi-Wan's perspective, and it would be a really awesome story. And so Ewan McGregor, the introduction of Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan and then Obi-Wan as a character is really good. Where the movie falters is the introduction of Anakin Skywalker and Jake Lloyd acting as Anakin Skywalker as a little kid. They make Anakin way too young, and his dynamic with Padme is some of the worst parts of the Star Wars prequel. As far as a dynamic, it's probably the worst dynamic. The idea that Padme and Anakin would fall for one another, considering how much older she is, but then also because it is quite obvious by the end of the second movie that Anakin has some real big issues and is displaying very destructive, very odd behavior. But Padme is just like, oh, I love him. He's amazing. And so they do not establish Anakin Skywalker. They make him too young. He isn't established very well as a character. And so it kind of hurts the movie. The movie is supposed to be about Anakin. The prequels are supposed to be a story about Anakin. And so when the main character is kind of a letdown and every interaction that he has is very odd and very weird, it doesn't really set a good tone for the movie and the movies that come after it. But like I said, there are some redeemable parts, especially the lightsaber battle at the end, Duel of the Fates with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan fighting Ray Park's Darth Maul is great. And it is a sneak peek of the kind of action that you're going to see in the movies to come. But overall, it cannot get over the hump of Anakin Skywalker's character being weird, so that is why it is number 9. Number 8 is Solo, not necessarily because Solo is a bad film, but just because it's the most forgettable film. It is one of the most unnecessary films in all of Star Wars, and you see this happen, whether maybe it's in Marvel or in Star Wars, where they bring back a character that didn't really need to be brought back. You didn't really have to expand on the story anymore. The character, as they have already existed, they were just fine. They were just fine the way they were. And when you bring back a character, you run the risk of completely destroying them altogether. And it is very, very hard to bring back a character and the greatness of that character surpass what has already been established. This is why I wasn't really a huge fan of the idea of the Kenobi series or the Ahsoka series. Obi-Wan Kenobi, we know who Obi-Wan Kenobi is. We don't really need any more. I know who Ahsoka is. Ahsoka as a character established in Star Wars: The Clone Wars and in Rebels is great. And I don't really need anything else because, again, you run the risk of destroying that character altogether. Now, I don't think that Han Solo as a character is destroyed in this movie. We will get to that in just a moment. But it is unnecessary. You didn't have to do it. It is kind of cool to see him getting the Millennium Falcon and making the Kessel Run and all these different things. And Lando Calrissian, I think, is kind of an underrated character, and so giving him a little bit more background is good. But you could easily pass by this if you're sitting down and you just see it pop on. You're like, it's just what happened in this movie again? Nothing worth remembering. So you're just going to skip it. Number 7, The Force Awakens. Now, like I said in Solo, in terms of getting to Han Solo's character being ruined, the Force Awakens does to Han Solo what The Rise of Skywalker did to Luke Skywalker, in that they bring back the character, but they turn him into a complete loser for no apparent reason. Apparently, he had divorced Leia for some, I don't even remember why. I don't even remember if it's completely fleshed out in the movies, but he leaves Leia, essentially leaves her to raise Ben, or Luke to raise Ben, and everything just crumbles. And there's not sufficient explanation as to why all of this happens. And what's made even worse is that Ben Solo kills his dad. Ben Solo kills his dad. It's like, why would Ben Solo kill his dad? I don't even remember what the logic was. And Kylo Ren, for all of his faults, he is the most consistently the most interesting character in the sequel trilogy, and that might not be saying much, but to have him kill off his dad and Han Solo doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, considering it seemed to be mostly Luke's fault for what happened to him, because of what happened to Ben Solo. Seems to be mostly Luke Skywalker's fault. So all of that hate should be directed at Luke and not really at his father. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of hyped for this movie, and this is why I put it at 7, is because yes, they destroy Han Solo's character, but this is the least outrageous of all of the prequel movies. This is the best movie in a trilogy that should have never happened. This is the best movie in a trilogy that is overall a disgrace to the Star Wars universe as a whole. And I didn't initially hate Rey as much as people hate her now, because they just throw her into the movie, and she's like, something inside me has always been there. And she's just great at everything, and you don't really know why. They try to fix this by making her the granddaughter of Palpatine, but it's all hollow. There's no real development. There's no real training. She just picks up a lightsaber and dominates everybody. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. They were forcing the Mary Sue aspect of Rey. I do think that because of the hype and because of some of the other things, like, I like Finn. Finn gets worse as the movies go on. Pretty much everybody gets worse as the movies go on. So this one's the least annoying of the prequel trilogy. One thing I do also want to say, and this is more so a concept for the Republic and the Rebels overall, why do we just get thrown into the Star Wars universe and the Republic and the Rebels have failed at every turn? So the Republic is established, then the Empire overthrows them. Luke Skywalker destroys the Empire, right? The Rebels destroy the Empire. Darth Vader's defeated. Palpatine's defeated. And then the movie ends. And then you're thrown back into the Star Wars universe and like, oh, now we have the First Order. The First Order was in charge. Well, what were the Rebels doing this whole time? Like, what were they doing? And this is why people say the Jedi suck at everything. It's like, what are you doing this whole time? Like, shouldn't you be making sure that no other tyrannical government or tyrannical rule is put in place? Why is it that they are always playing from behind? Why is it that they're always the ones that are downtrodden upon? And why is it that they're always having to form some kind of alliance? Like they're always the underdog. What have you been doing this whole time? Shouldn't you have been taking the necessary precautions to keep something like the First Order from happening? I don't know. Like I said, it's not as annoying as some of the other prequel movies, but it also sets the grounds for things to come in terms of destroying all of the old characters, as well as not properly. If you're going to make Rey the hero, you've got to have something better than her just picking up a lightsaber and being great at everything. Number 6 is Attack of the Clones. This is a movie of extremely high highs and extremely low lows. The lows being, again, the dynamic between Anakin and Padme, which is probably the worst in this movie. Because, again, in this movie, Anakin goes and he slaughters all of these Tusken raiders, all of these, he attacks this camp of Tusken raiders. And sure, they had kidnapped his mom, but he just like kills all of them, right? He just kills all of them, and Padme still loves him. Obviously, he has some issues, but and beyond that, he's just whiny. He's entitled. He's whiny. He complains about Obi-Wan all the time, even though Obi-Wan puts up with so much of his crap. Obi-Wan is like the most long-suffering individual in all of Star Wars, and Anakin can't decide if he loves him. He's like a father to me, but then the next time he's like, he's unfair, and he seems to hate Obi-Wan, and he does end up hating Obi-Wan. And so that is those are kind of the lows. And Hayden Christensen gets a lot of flack for his portrayal. Well, initially he did. And I guess it's kind of good that he's now receiving his flowers. People watch the prequels and are like, well, this is legitimately horrible. Maybe we were too hard on Hayden Christensen. So I'm glad that people like his performances now. I'm glad that he gets the proper amount of praise. But in Attack of the Clones, his dynamic with Padme doesn't really work. And that is really the lowest points of the movie. Everything that takes place on Naboo is very weird and unwatchable. Now, the highs of this is I love Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee is probably one of my favorite actors of all time. And not only was he a very interesting human being in real life, but he has been a part of some of the biggest movie franchises ever. He was also in Lord of the Rings. He's in Star Wars. And so just a real gentleman's gentleman and all around a cool guy. Count Dooku is a very underrated character. Count Dooku always kind of lives in the shadows of Darth Vader and of Palpatine and of other more prominent Sith figures. But in terms of him, he's more of like a political figure as opposed to just this evil overlord kind of person. And Count Dooku is actually kind of right in some ways when it comes to his observation of the Jedi and his observation of how the galaxy works politically. He kind of plays both sides of it. He's not just the evil overlord, but he's also this political figure, and he's kind of like this suave guy that actually has some political pull. But it's kind of unclear what Count Dooku's ultimate goal is, because he doesn't fully buy into what the Jedi have to offer, because he was once a Jedi, but he also doesn't really buy in fully to what Palpatine has to offer. So from what I remember, his purest intentions, his truest intentions aren't really well spelled out. But as a character, he's pretty good. The arena fight scene with all of the Jedi and Jango Fett and all of the Geonosian aliens is really cool. And then the fight scene between Obi-Wan and Count Dooku is great. And then when Yoda comes in, and it's made very obvious that Yoda would eventually defeat Count Dooku in battle, regardless of how great Count Dooku was, is really, really good. And so the ending kind of makes up for the romance between Anakin and Padme, and that is why it's number 6. Now, one thing I would like to mention is that when you get to, now we're cracking the top 5, what matters to me a lot is watchability. is are some of these movies in the top 5? Do they deserve technically to be at number 6, number 5? Maybe not. But in terms of how much I love watching them, that is kind of what is leading me to these rankings. There are some movies, for example, A New Hope is objectively better. I'm going to get to New Hope in a second. The New Hope is objectively better than most of the movies on this list, but there are a handful of movies that I would, if I had to choose between watching A New Hope or maybe Revenge of the Sith, as you will see here in a minute, I'd probably choose Revenge of the Sith. But number 5 is Rogue One. Now, again, this could have had the same problem with Solo in that we're going to make a movie that bridges the gap between two other movies, and that can be hard to do because if you know what happens before and you know what happens after, how can you make a compelling story with the characters that exist in the middle? And it would have been very hard for them to take characters that we know and love and say, this is what they were doing between these two movies. But they don't really do that. You do see a kind of like a cameo from Princess Leia at the end of the movie, and then you do see Darth Vader. But they introduce a whole new slew of characters that you really come to enjoy and like by the end of the movie. Now, what's cool about this movie is that they finally they finally do something that's out of the ordinary in that they introduce all of these characters and then they immediately kill them off. And it's a movie about war, it's a movie about sacrifice. All of these characters, even the younger characters, all of these characters that you're introduced to, they end up dying towards the end of the movie. They lay down their lives to try and get vital pieces of information to Princess Leia and the Rebel Alliance. So they dared to do something that usually you won't see, especially when you're talking about a huge franchise like Star Wars, in that they take the main characters of that story in the movie and they kill them off almost instantly. The end of the movie, Darth Vader is in the movie throughout. He's not really the focus of it. He's not the enemy that's chasing them, but they have him let loose at the end of the movie where he destroys all of the Rebel Alliance troopers, where he goes to capture Princess Leia. And that is just unbelievably good. It's great. The last few minutes where Darth Vader just rips through everybody is really, really great. Number 4 is A New Hope. One of the reasons why, if you were to stack up all of the major movie franchises, you have your Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Jurassic Park. The reason why I have always leaned towards saying Star Wars is the best is not necessarily because I like it the most. Marvel obviously has a lot more extended success. Like, what are they, 27, 28, almost 30 movies deep into the cinematic universe? Nobody's ever going to be able to replicate that. Nobody's ever going to be able to have that long-term success when it comes to making a group of cohesive movies and putting them together in a collective universe. And I'm a huge fan of the Jurassic Park series. As a kid, I really liked the Jurassic Park series. Now, Jurassic Park isn't as large of a universe as Star Wars, but I might like it a little bit more. But I've always given the creative tip of the cap to Star Wars because the guts it took to create the end of the story first. We're starting with episodes 4, 5, and 6. We're going to tell the second part of the story first. That takes a lot of guts. And the reason why I give Star Wars the edge creatively is because with Marvel, and I'm not saying this to take away from any of the writing that the Marvel writers have done, because they're also really talented. But the reason I give the edge to Star Wars is because people who write comic book movies, they are pulling from 60, 70, maybe even 80 years of source material. Now, it's hard to adapt every single comic book into a live action movie. So what you end up seeing is when an Avengers movie comes out, it's kind of an amalgamation of a number of different prominent storylines. But again, they're pulling from all of that source material. They're pulling from Steve Ditko, they're pulling from Stan Lee, and it's impressive how they can translate that, but it's not nearly as impressive as George Lucas coming up with an original idea and saying, we're putting this to film. He was creating the universe as they went, as the movies were being created. These were ideas that he thought up in his mind and made decisions as he went as to how the universe is going to be laid out. There were no animated shows, there were no comic books, there was no source material. The movies preceded all of the toys, all of the comics, all of the legends, all of the other stories that you could tell, all of the other media. It preceded all of that, and he basically came up with it from scratch. And so that is to me, it's one of the greatest accomplishments in all of movie history. And it starts off with A New Hope. And A New Hope is behind three other movies, not because of any fault of its own. It doesn't really have, to me, any huge major flaws. And I'm not really that technical when it comes to breaking down movies. The reason why it is number 4 is because the other three just simply surpass it in quality, in my opinion. But the introduction of Mark Hamill, Darth Vader remains one of the most iconic and one of the greatest villains of all time. And a lot of that has to do with how he was introduced, not only in A New Hope, but in the first 3 movies, the original trilogy altogether. Han Solo, I don't know if I've ever seen a Harrison Ford movie that was before A New Hope. And this is kind of what brought him to the forefront in Hollywood. And he obviously becomes one of the most notable actors of all time, and a really great actor overall. And so they put together a really good cast. The beginning of the story is great and does a much better job. If you were to break it down trilogy to trilogy to trilogy, A New Hope sets the groundwork for the rest of the trilogy better than The Phantom Menace, way better than The Force Awakens. So it's 4th, not really because it has major flaws, but just because the next 3 are so good. Number 3 is Revenge of the Sith. Now, technically, in terms of importance, A New Hope is more important to the Star Wars franchise. And technically, maybe from a story standpoint, it might be better. But in terms of watchability, I think Revenge of the Sith is great. Out of all the Star Wars movies, if I had to choose, like, hey, you can only sit down and watch one Star Wars movie, I might just pick Revenge of the Sith. Is it as good as Return of the Jedi or Empire Strikes Back? Maybe not. But the action is top notch. And the action changes a lot from the original trilogy to the prequel trilogy to the sequel trilogy. In the original trilogy, the lightsaber duels are much slower and they seem to be more calculated. In the prequel trilogy, it's almost as if it's a dance, and I don't necessarily think it looks forced. And of course, it's choreographed before, but it does seem like they're pushing themselves to the physical limit. And there's a great deal of athleticism involved in the prequel lightsaber battles, as opposed to the original trilogy. The sequel trilogy is just Kylo Ren and Rey flailing about with no real intent or purpose. I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous. But Revenge of the Sith, it is the most bearable movie in terms of the dynamic between Padme and Anakin. It's still weird, but it does get better. And I think the weirdness of their relationship actually kind of feeds into the story, as opposed to them just Anakin making creepy remarks to Padme on Naboo. Now their somewhat strained relationship, and the fact that it's secret, does come into play towards the end of the movie. And here you see Palpatine's true plan fully come into the forefront of the story. And you get more and more hints of what his plan is and how he plans on using Anakin and misleading Anakin. And so Palpatine's turn at the end isn't really a surprise, but I do think is pulled off fairly well. And one of the reasons why it's pulled off well is because you kind of hesitate for a second and think maybe Palpatine is right, because the Jedi Council at this point has failed to realize that the evil overlord of the Sith is actually the Chancellor of the Republic. Like, you can't sense that. You live right down the road from him. You don't know that. You can't sense that. You can't figure it out. Nobody figures it out. And on top of that, the Jedi Council's treatment of Anakin Skywalker is one of the biggest reasons why he ends up turning to the dark side. If he could have found friendship and help from any of the other Jedi other than Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan kind of overlooks Anakin's problems because he loves him like a brother. He's very long-suffering with Anakin. But if Yoda or Mace Windu or any member of the Jedi Council would have taken a serious interest in Anakin, then all of this could have been avoided. So when Palpatine overthrows the Jedi and tells them that they're committing treason, you're kind of thinking, well, they kind of deserve this, right? They kind of deserve all of these things because they have become very self-righteous. They have become very blind to their own failures. And because they're blind to their own failures, they also can't sense the failures of the Republic. And that a Sith is sitting right underneath their nose. So Palpatine is kind of right. I do think the Sith are right about a number of things. I have an unpopular opinion. I don't know if it's unpopular or not, but the Empire was right about some things. Not about everything, but about some things. But maybe I'll talk about that another day. But Revenge of the Sith, the ending of the movie is great. It's very sad, but in terms of paying off the things that were set in place in The Phantom Menace and the Attack of the Clones, even though there are a lot of bumps along the way, I think the payoff in the conclusion to the prequel trilogy is good. The Mustafar lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan and Anakin is an all-timer. It is an all-time great fight scene. And when you sit down on YouTube, I have a bad problem. I don't like to watch a lot of new things. A lot of times what I will do, I spend most of my time with media. I spend most of my time on YouTube. So I'll be sitting there eating lunch or something. I'll be like, I can't think of anything new to watch. So I'm going to go watch this epic fight scene from a movie. And the duel on Mustafar and the duel between Yoda and Darth Sidious taking place at the same time and them mixing that up is great. And the Mustafar battle specifically, again, is an all-time great. I put it up there with the Batman warehouse fight scene from Batman v Superman, the highway fight scene between Captain America and Winter Soldier. Like, this is an all-time action scene right here. And it is very sad. It is very sad that you see how Darth Vader or Anakin becomes Darth Vader, and you start out with a young Anakin Skywalker, which, isn't very good in The Phantom Menace, but you kind of see this nice kid transition into a monster. And it's especially painful from Obi-Wan's point of view because, again, he overlooked a lot of Anakin's failures and a lot of his faults, and it came back to bite him in the rear end because maybe he didn't know how to fully address all of these things. So it's very sad, but I think it pays off the prequel trilogy well, and then gives us a decent understanding of why Anakin turned to the dark side and why Darth Vader, who Darth Vader is and why he became Darth Vader in the first place. Number 2 is Return of the Jedi. The Return of the Jedi is similar to Revenge of the Sith, a great payoff to the end of the original trilogy. The redemption of Darth Vader is done. I don't like it. You could look at it. It's like, well, this is just the trope of the bad guy feels sympathy, and he eventually comes back to being a good guy in the last possible second. It might be a trope, but Darth Vader's redemption might be the story that solidified that trope as something popular that is done. It was kind of, it obviously wasn't the first thing, but it was a very iconic thing. It was a very iconic thing for Luke Skywalker to throw his lightsaber to the side and tell his father that he's not fighting him. And Darth Vader realizing that he had failed and that he was wrong and destroying the Emperor and sacrificing himself for his son and kind of for the galaxy. And it's a very interesting story point because you start out the story with a young Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine, and you're like, this guy's supposed to be the chosen one. This annoying little kid is supposed to be the chosen one. And it didn't exactly play out. It didn't exactly play out. You would have thought that Anakin, he would have just became an all powerful Jedi and destroyed all the Sith. No, there were a lot of hurdles. There were a lot of roadblocks that stood in the way of that. And it was kind of a roller coaster of a journey, but he eventually got there. He eventually did fulfill the prophecy. And Anakin did end up being the chosen one. Now I know people say that, well, Luke was actually the chosen one, and that's kind of true. I mean, but there would be no Luke without Anakin, right? And so the end of the original trilogy is they pulled it off, I think, in a unique way. I think they pulled it off in a really consistent way when you look at the quality of the original trilogy movies. There are a couple just small throwaway things. The fact that they had to destroy the Death Star again, and the Empire left themselves open for that happening a second time is kind of stupid. You spent who knows how much time, money, and energy putting into this huge weapon, and you let it get destroyed twice. You had the ultimate planet-destroying power in the palm of your hand, and you let something, oh, there's an opening. We're just going to shoot these proton bombs into it, whatever. That's kind of dumb. It's kind of a weak plot point. But and there are smaller things than that in the Return of the Jedi, and that's why it's second. But overall, it deserves the second spot. Number one, The Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back is top tier Star Wars and top tier cinema in general. And it's kind of hard to put, I guess you could say, Star Wars as a comic book movie. It's an action sci-fi movie. It can be kind of hard to look at a movie like that and put it in the upper echelon of movies, generally speaking. But The Empire Strikes Back is one of the greatest movies of all time because it was the peak of a sci-fi trilogy that seemed to pull off something new. Star Wars was new. It was different. It was a huge. It was massively popular, and one of the reasons why it's massively popular is because of The Empire Strikes Back. And this is where you get to see some of the major building blocks of the story, some of the major building blocks of the original trilogy, where Luke Skywalker is no longer just that guy on Tatooine that wasn't really capable. He has to become a capable individual. He has to become somebody who is worthy of becoming a Jedi and somebody who is powerful enough to confront Vader. This is what Yoda tells him. It's like you will only be a Jedi. You must face your fears. You must confront Darth Vader. Then and only then will you become a Jedi. And The Empire Strikes Back, yes, it's not the end of the original trilogy, but a lot of the core ideas where you see Luke Skywalker become that worthy person, you see Luke Skywalker become that powerful person, where now he is able to face the Emperor and face Vader and face his fears, is great. And the character building that takes place in The Empire Strikes Back is some of the heaviest in all of Star Wars. And Leia, again, is great. Han Solo as a character, again, iconic and great. And there really are no holes. There are no holes. Like I mentioned, the plot device with the Death Star in Return of the Jedi, it kind of puts it below it. So there is really no major holes like that in The Empire Strikes Back. And because of that, it remains not only the best Star Wars movie, but one of the greatest movies of all time. And that is my Star Wars ranking list.